Hello everyone, and thank you for coming back to the channel. In today's episode, Diem and CEO Tuan's story takes a challenging new turn. After being accepted by the elderly woman, Diem takes Tuan away from the small house and brings him to the hospital for a health check. But at a place they thought was only for peace of mind, they are forced to face a harsh reality. Tuan's condition is more serious than expected, the treatment will be long-term, and the cost will be extremely high. In the cold hospital hallway, Tuan is overwhelmed and afraid of being left behind, while Diem quietly carries the weight of worrying about their future. There are no more grand promises, only hands held tightly, and a decision to stay together no matter how difficult the road ahead may be. What will Diem do to keep Tuan by her side? And can CEO Tuan overcome his illness and find himself again? Stay with us until the end to find out. If you're enjoying this emotional journey, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss what happens next. Wishing you all a wonderful day. And now, let's begin the story. After receiving acceptance from both the elderly woman and CEO Toan himself, Diem didn't delay any longer. She gently packed a few essential belongings, then left the small house with Toan, the place that had been his world for so long. The elderly woman walked them all the way to the gate, offering a few familiar words of advice. Tuan glanced back at her, his eyes still full of attachment, but this time he wasn't afraid because he knew he wasn't being abandoned. Tuan stepped forward and looked up at the large building in front of him, confusion written all over his face. The unfamiliar sounds, the footsteps, the loudspeaker calling, names, the sharp smell of disinfectant made him pause for a few seconds. They walked together down a long hallway, white lights reflecting off the cold tiled floor. Tuan slowed down his brows, drawing together slightly. He looked around, then turned to Diem and asked softly but clearly, "Where are you taking me?" There was no resistance in his voice, only the very real uncertainty of someone stepping into a place he didn't understand. Diem stopped and faced him. She didn't pull him forward or rush to answer. Instead, she placed her hand lightly on his arm. "Don't worry," she said gently. "I'm taking you somewhere safe. Just to let the doctors take a look at you." Tuan met her eyes, still a little lost. "Will I have to stay here long?" he asked. No, Diem shook her head. "Just for a little while. I'm here with you." Those words seemed to ease his breathing. He nodded slightly, then continued walking beside her down the long hallway, a place where a new chapter was beginning. No more running away, only trust held tightly with every step forward. The clinic door closed behind them, leaving a cold, quiet room. The white ceiling lights made Toan squint without realizing it. He paused for a moment, as if his body itself was questioning why he was here. The faint smell of disinfectant drifted through the air, strange and uncomfortable. "Have a seat," Diem said softly, her hand resting lightly on his back. Tuan did as she said and sat on the edge of the examination bed. He turned to look at her, confusion in his eyes. "Why am I here?" he asked in a low voice. "Just so the doctor can check on you for a bit." she replied, trying to keep her smile calm. The doctor came in a middle-aged man with a steady, composed voice. He introduced himself briefly and began asking questions. "What's your name?" Tuan was silent for a few seconds, then slowly shook his head. "I don't know." The doctor wrote something down, his expression growing more serious. "Do you know what day it is today?" Tuan looked up at the ceiling, trying to think. A dull ache spread through his head, and he frowned. "My head hurts." Diem immediately reached for his hand. "It's okay, don't push yourself," she said quickly. The doctor checked his reflexes, asked him to follow a finger with his eyes and to touch different points. Sometimes Tuan responded correctly. Sometimes he was slow and out of sync. When the doctor asked him to stand and take a few steps, Tuan swayed slightly. Diem caught him, her heart tightening. "We'll need to run a CT scan and an MRI," the doctor said. "We need a clearer picture of what's going on inside." In the scanning room, Tuan lay still on the stretcher. The machine's steady mechanical sounds filled the cold space. He closed his eyes, his breathing growing faster. Behind the glass, Diem watched him, her hands clenched tightly. She didn't take her eyes off him for even a second. When it was over, Tuan was wheeled out. He looked exhausted, his face pale. "Is it done?" he asked weakly. "Yes," she answered gently, brushing his hair back. "You did great." The doctor asked Diem to step outside for a private conversation. The door closed behind them, and he lowered his voice. "His injury isn't mild. The memory loss is just the surface." Diem's heart started pounding. "What do you mean?" "Exactly." The doctor looked straight at her. "We need to review the full results, but I want you to be mentally prepared. This situation is not simple." Diem nodded, forcing herself to stay calm. When she returned to the room, she saw Toan sitting there waiting, his eyes searching for her the moment he saw her. "What did the doctor say?" he asked. She smiled, even as her emotions began to churn inside. "They just need to look at the results a bit more." Tuan nodded, trusting her completely. And it was that trust that made the weight in Diem's heart even heavier, because she knew the hardest part was still waiting ahead. The hospital hallway stretched on endlessly white lights, spreading evenly across the cold tiled floor. Diem and Tuan sat side by side on the plastic chairs against the wall. For the first few minutes, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of footsteps passing by and the occasional announcement calling patients' names broke the silence, distant and fragmented. Tuan sat slightly hunched, his hands clasped together. He looked around, then turned to Diem. "It's really crowded here," he said, more like an idle observation. "Yeah," she replied softly. "It'll be over soon." He nodded and fell quiet again. After a while, he shifted slightly, leaning back against the chair. His gaze settled on the doctor's office door, the one that had just closed when they came out. "If the results aren't good, what happens?" he asked very quietly, as if afraid the question itself might make things worse. Diem turned to him. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out and took his hand, their fingers interlacing warm and firm. "Then we treat it," she said, "even if it takes time." Tuan looked down at their joined hands, then up at her face. "Will you leave me here?" he asked, his voice growing softer. The question tightened Diem's chest. She smiled, though it took effort to keep herself steady. No, she shook her head. Where you are, I'm there. Tuan let out a lighter breath, as if setting down an invisible burden. He tilted his head and gently rested it against her shoulder. The gesture was awkward, but sincere. Diem didn't pull away. She shifted slightly, letting him lean more comfortably. The smell of medicine here. It makes me uncomfortable, he said. Close your eyes for a bit, she replied. I'm here. He did as she said. His breathing slowly steadied. In that moment, Diem studied his face for a long time. Thinner now, familiar, yet strangely different. She thought of the fire in the kitchen the evening before, the smell of roasted corn, the look in his eyes when he finally stopped running. She silently prayed. As long as he would be okay, she could endure anything else. Time passed slowly. The second hand crept forward, little by little. The doctor's office door remained closed. Diem glanced at the clock, then at the door, then back at Toan. He opened his eyes and caught the worry in her gaze. Are you scared? He asked. She shook her head instinctively, then paused. A little, she admitted, but not of the results. I'm afraid you'll think you're a burden. Tuan was silent. After a moment, he said, if it costs too much, should we just go home? His words caught in Diem's throat. She tightened her grip on his hand. No, she said firmly. You need to get better. Everything else, I'll handle. He looked at her, his eyes filled with both gratitude and confusion. You always say, I'll handle it, he said softly. I don't remember what I've ever done for you. She smiled and gently brushed his hair back. That's okay. Right now, just sitting here with me is enough. The doctor's office door opened. A nurse called Diem's name. She stood up, her heart racing. Tuan tried to stand as well, but she gently pressed his shoulder, guiding him back down. I'll just go listen, she said. Wait for me here. Okay? He nodded, but his eyes stayed on her until the door closed. On the waiting chair, Toan sat upright, his hands resting on his knees. He didn't know what was coming. He only knew that the one person he trusted was on the other side of that door. As for Diem, the fragile sense of calm she'd felt moments ago disappeared the instant she stepped inside. She knew the next few minutes could change everything, and she had to be strong enough to walk back out, take his hand, no matter how harsh the truth might be. The consultation room door closed behind Diem. The space was so quiet, she could clearly hear her own heartbeat. The doctor sat across from her, opening the file, his expression more serious than before. She tightened her grip on her bag strap and waited. We've reviewed the imaging results carefully. The doctor began, his voice slow and measured. Mr. Tuan has suffered brain damage from a severe injury. It doesn't only affect his memory. There are areas that have been under prolonged pressure. Diem felt her throat go dry. Is it dangerous? The doctor nodded slightly. There's a risk of recurring severe headaches, cognitive disorders, and even seizures. Without proper treatment, the condition could worsen. He turned another page. The treatment plan will be long-term. It requires close monitoring and staged intervention. The cost will be significant. A number was mentioned. Too high. For a moment, Diem's mind went blank. She nodded instinctively, though her hands were already trembling. "Is there any other option?" she asked quietly. "We'll try to optimize as much as possible," the doctor said. "But this is the necessary level to ensure his safety." When Diem stepped back into the hallway, Tuan stood up immediately. His eyes searched for her at once. "Are you okay?" he asked. Noticing the change in her face, she stopped in front of him and took a deep breath. "Let's go in and talk to the doctor together." He nodded and followed her into the room. The doctor explained again, more briefly this time. Tuan listened. He didn't understand all the medical terms, but he understood the worry in Diem's eyes. "Does it cost a lot of money?" he asked hesitantly. The doctor paused for a moment, then nodded. Tuan turned to Diem. "If that's the case, can we go home?" The words struck straight at her heart. She shook her head immediately. "No," she said, forcing herself to stay calm. "You need treatment, but you'll be exhausted," he said softly. "I don't want to be a burden." Diem took his hand and held it tightly. "You're not a burden. You're the person I love." The doctor stood up, giving them a few moments alone. When the door closed, the hallway fell silent again. Toan lowered his head, his shoulders heavy. "I'm sorry," he said very quietly. She shook her head and gently stroked his hair. "There's nothing to be sorry about." Tuan looked at her, his eyes filled with both confusion and resolve. "If we have to do the treatment, I'll try. But promise me one thing." "What is it?" "Don't leave me alone," he said. "Even if I forget, stay with me." Tears welled up in Diem's eyes, but she smiled. "I promise." She looked up at the notice board in front of her. The road ahead was long and difficult. The money they would need was a real burden. But when she looked back at Tuan, holding her hand with complete trust, her worry turned into determination. "Let's go," she said. "We start today." Tuan nodded. He didn't remember the past, but he chose to stay. And Diem knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would keep moving forward without letting go. The hospital hallway stretched out before them, brightly lit, yet cold. Pale fluorescent lights reflected off the polished tiles, making every footstep sound sharper than usual. Diem and Toan stepped out of the consultation room without saying a word. Tuan walked slowly, almost on instinct. His hand was still holding Diem's, but it was cold and slightly trembling. She felt it clearly, even without turning to look at him. She was afraid that if she met his eyes, all her effort to stay composed would fall apart. They sat down on the chairs against the wall. In front of them hung a treatment cost board, the bold numbers almost echoing the doctor's words from moments earlier. Diem turned her face away, pretending to watch the flow of people passing by. Tuan spoke first, his voice soft and slow. "Do we have to stay here for a long time?" Diem gently tightened her grip on his hand. "I don't know yet," she said. "The doctor says they need to monitor you more." He nodded and fell silent. After a while, he asked again, carefully choosing his words. "Will I have to take medicine for the rest of my life?" The question made Diem pause for a second. She took a deep breath, choosing her answer. "We don't know for sure," she said. "Let's listen to what the doctor says first." Tuan lowered his head. His shoulders sagged as if another invisible weight had been placed on them. "I've caused you too much trouble already," he said quietly. This time, Diem turned to look at him. His face no longer showed panic or fear, only exhaustion and guilt. She lifted her hand and gently rested it on his arm. "Don't say that," she said. "I'm here by choice." He looked up at her, confusion in his eyes. "But you're tired too," he said honestly. "I can see it." The words pierced her heart. She smiled, though it was fragile. "I'm tired because I'm worried about you." A patient was wheeled past them on a stretcher, the wheels rattling across the floor. Toan watched, then asked very softly, "If it costs too much, should we go home?" Diem turned to him at once. She wasn't angry, only overwhelmed by a surge of aching sadness. "No," she said firmly. "You're not allowed to give up." He stayed quiet. After a moment, he nodded slightly, as if accepting it. "Okay, if you're here." She squeezed his hand tighter. "I'm here." They sat side by side in the wide hallway, surrounded by strangers, yet each other was the only support they had. The shock of what had just happened hadn't settled yet, but in that moment they both understood one thing clearly. The road ahead would be hard, and they couldn't walk it alone. The nurse gently pulled the curtain around the bed and spoke softly but clearly. "Mr. Toan needs to stay under observation for a few more hours. A family member can step outside to take care of the paperwork." Tuan lay on the hospital bed, his eyes following Diem as she stood up. He reached for her hand almost instinctively. "Where are you going?" He asked, a hint of worry in his voice. "I'm just stepping out for a bit," she said, bending down so her eyes were level with his. "I'll be right back." He nodded, but his hand held onto hers for a few more seconds, as if afraid that the moment he let go, she might disappear. Diem smiled, gently loosened his grip, tucked the blanket around him, and stepped outside. The door closed behind her, and the air outside immediately felt colder. Diem stood still for a few seconds at the administrative counter. On the desk lay a stack of forms that needed her signature, the numbers printed clearly, leaving no room for negotiation. She picked up the pen, her hand trembling slightly. When she placed the final signature, she walked back into the hallway and leaned against the wall. She let out a deep breath, as if only now allowing herself to feel tired. She took out her phone and stared at her contacts for a long moment. The first call connected. "Sis, can I ask, could you lend me some money?" There was silence on the other end for a few seconds, followed by a roundabout reply. The call ended, the second call, the third. Some people refused outright. Some said they'd call back. Others didn't answer at all. Each time she hung up, Diem felt her shoulders sink a little more. She looked toward the window at the end of the hallway. The afternoon was slipping away, the sunlight growing faint. "It's okay," she told herself. "I'll figure something out." Inside the observation room, Tuan opened his eyes. He looked around and didn't see Diem. His heart started racing. He sat up slightly, his hand brushing against the IV line. Diem. He called softly, but there was no answer. A nurse came over. Please lie back down. Your family member stepped out to take care of some procedures. Toan shook his head. Will she come back? The nurse smiled reassuringly. Of course. She asked me to keep an eye on you. But Toan still couldn't relax. He stared at the door, his eyes full of worry. The fear of being left behind rose up again, familiar and persistent. Just then, the door opened. Diem walked in. When Tuan saw her, he immediately sat up, forgetting his exhaustion. You're back, she said, hurrying to his side. Toan reached out and wrapped his arms around her, clumsy but tight. I thought you left me, he said, his voice shaking. She froze for a moment, then wrapped her arms around him. No, she said firmly. I'm not going anywhere. She sat down beside the bed and held his hand. His breathing gradually steadied. In that moment, all the worries about money faded into the background. There were only two people holding on to each other in an unfamiliar hospital, like a quiet promise that no matter what happened, they would always find their way back to each other. The observation room grew quieter as late afternoon settled in. The last light of the day slipped through a narrow window, falling softly onto the tiled floor in a thin, fragile streak. Toan lay back on the bed, still holding Diem's hand, as if letting go would make her disappear. Diem sat beside him, her back straight, but her shoulders slightly heavy. She looked at him for a long moment before speaking softly. Are you feeling any better? Tuan nodded. A little. Just tired. He hesitated, then added, but I'm scared. She turned to him at once. What are you afraid of? I'm afraid you'll have to worry too much, he said slowly, choosing each word carefully. I don't remember anything. And I'm sick. I don't know how I can help you. Diem lifted her hand and gently placed it on his chest, where his heartbeat was steady. You're breathing, she said quietly. That's enough. Tuan looked at her hand, then up at her face. But if the treatment takes too long, if it costs too much. He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Then we take it step by step. She cut in her voice firm. No one expects us to fix everything in one day. He shook his head. I don't want you to suffer because of me. Those words left Diem silent for a long moment. She looked out the window, then back at him. Why do you think I'm here? She asked. Tuan thought for a moment. Because you care about me. That's right. She nodded. And when you care, you don't keep score. He pressed his lips together, his eyes uncertain. If one day I still don't remember anything, will you get tired? She smiled, a gentle but resolute smile. I might get tired, she said honestly, but I won't regret it. Outside, the sound of a medicine cart rolled down the hallway. The room grew even quieter. Tuan loosened his grip slightly, then suddenly said, I don't remember the past, but I know the present. What about the present? She asked. In the present, he looked at her. I don't want to lose you. The words made Diem's eyes sting. She leaned down, resting her forehead lightly against his. Then stay, she said. Stay and get treated. Stay with me. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, then nodded. Okay, I'll stay. She sat back up and pulled the blanket over him. Get some sleep. I'm here. He looked at her one more time, as if trying to memorize her face. If I forget tomorrow, remind me, okay? She smiled, her voice trembling slightly. I will. I'll remind you every day. Toan closed his eyes. His breathing slowly evened out. In the small room, a promise that didn't need memory was quietly made. No noise, no ceremony, but strong enough to hold two people together as the hardest days lay ahead.